The alarm did not sound like a warning. It sounded like a scream. I was standing in the control deck of the outpost Halden Reach, my hand halfway to a cup of coffee, when every screen in the room turned red at once. Not our alarm, not our frequency. Something had crossed 1,000 light-years of empty space, bent and broken and barely alive, and landed on our doorstep like a bird with a shattered wing. My name is Ethan Cole. Back then I was a communications officer. Nothing more, nothing less. I did not know that within a week I would be standing on the deck of a warship, pointed at the heart of a battle that would decide how the galaxy saw us forever. The signal repeated itself over and over, broken and desperate. Commander Grace Doyle, the officer in charge of the outpost, stood behind me with her arms crossed, watching the translation software struggle to make sense of it. "Clean it up," she said. "I want words, not noise." I worked the panel with shaking hands. Static peeled away, layer by layer, until a voice came through. It was not human. It was thin, high, cracked with fear. The words that finally formed were simple. Anyone who can hear this. We are dying, please, anyone." The room went quiet. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. We had been part of the wider galaxy for almost 30 years by then. Ever since the first alien ships found us circling our own sun and decided we were harmless enough to leave alone. Harmless. That was the word they used. Humanity had been given a small seat at the edge of a very large table, tolerated, occasionally mocked, never truly welcomed. Other species had fleets 1,000 ships strong and histories older than our written language. We had scrappy ships built from stubbornness and steel, and a habit of showing up where we were not invited. This signal was not meant for us. It was a general distress call, broadcast wide, in the hope that someone, Anshe, would answer. According to the traffic logs, it had already reached the border stations of at least 4 other empires. None of them had responded. Not one. "Why isn't anyone helping them?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Commander Doyle did not answer right away. She walked to the window that looked out over the black nothing of the system's edge, and when she finally spoke, her voice was flat and hard. "Because helping means fighting whatever did this to them. And nobody wants to fight something that can break a fleet." She turned back to me. "Get me a channel to Earth Command. Now." The next 6 hours felt like 6 years. I sat at my station and listened to that voice repeat its plea, again and again, weaker each time, while the higher ranks argued about what it meant. I was not in the room for those arguments. I only heard fragments later, from officers who had been there, about council members shouting over each other, about admirals slamming their fists on tables, about the oldest argument in human history playing out again. Is it our business? Is it our place? Do we send our children into a fire that is not ours to fight? But there was another argument too, quieter, and in the end, stronger. It came, I was told, from a young council member named Laura Finch, who stood up in that chamber and said something that would later be printed in every newsfeed on Earth. "If we wait until it is our fire," she said, "there will be no one left to answer when we call." The vote was not close. Within a day, the order went out across every human shipyard, every training base, every reserve fleet. We were going. I remember the moment the notice reached our outpost. It came as a single line of text on every screen in the station. "The Armada is forming. All available ships report to Assembly Point Kestrel by 0600, Cycle 4. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding somewhere between fear and something I did not yet have a name for. I had trained for this. Everyone had. But training is a story you tell yourself in a warm room. This was the story becoming real. Commander Doyle found me still staring at the screen an hour later. "You wanted communications duty," she said. "Congratulations. You are about to have plenty to communicate." "Are we really doing this?" I asked her, answering a call meant for someone else. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face softened, just slightly. "Ethan, nobody else was going to answer. That is exactly why we have to." 2 days later, I stood on the launch platform of the assembly point, looking up at ships I had only ever seen in briefing photographs. Cruisers with hulls scarred from asteroid fields. Carriers built in 3 different shipyards stitched together under one flag. Fighters lined up in the hangar bay like teeth in a jaw. It was not the cleanest fleet in the galaxy. It was not the most beautiful. But it was ours, and it was moving. I was assigned to a mid-sized cruiser called the Valiant, under the command of Captain Laura Finch, the very same officer whose words had helped tip the vote back home. She was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, with the kind of calm that made a room feel steadier just by her being in it. When I reported to the bridge for the first time, she looked up from her console and gave me a short nod. "Cole. Communications. Good. You are going to be busy." "Yes, Captain." "We are not flying into a parade," she said, loud enough for the rest of the bridge crew to hear. "We are flying into the wreckage of an empire that could not save itself. I want every one of you to understand what that means. Whatever did this to them is still out there. We are not going to be the second empire that could not save itself." Nobody cheered. Nobody made speeches back. We simply nodded, because that was enough. As the Valiant pulled away from the platform and fell into formation with 300 other ships, I looked out the viewport at the stars sliding past, and for the first time I understood the size of what we were doing. We were not the strongest fleet in known space. We were not the oldest, or the most respected, but we were the only ones moving toward the fire instead of away from it. Somewhere out there, a dying voice was still calling for anyone who would listen. We had decided to be that anyone. The jump drive engaged with a shudder that ran through the whole ship, and the stars stretched into long white threads around us. I gripped the edge of my console and thought of the recording still looping in my memory, that thin, frightened voice, and I made myself a quiet promise. Whatever we found out there, we were not turning back. Behind me, on every channel across the fleet, one order was already being repeated ship to ship, a simple line that would follow us all the way to the edge of the war. Humanity is answering. Hold on, we are coming. The jump took 4 days, and every hour of it felt longer than the last. I had never traveled with a fleet this size before. 312 ships, moving together through the long white corridor of folded space, each one carrying its own crew, its own fears, its own reasons for saying yes when Earth Command asked for volunteers. I spent most of those 4 days at my communications station, relaying course corrections, weather reports from nowhere, and endless streams of data from the scout ships riding ahead of us. It was on the second day that I first spoke with someone from outside our own fleet. The channel opened without warning, a strange frequency our systems had to scramble to translate. When the voice came through, it was careful, measured, almost formal, in the way of someone speaking a language they had learned but did not trust themselves with. "This is Vessel of the Ninth Accord, hailing the human formation. We did not expect you to come." I called Captain Finch to the console immediately. She stood beside me, arms folded, listening. "This is Captain Laura Finch, of the human vessel Valiant," she said. "We received the distress call. We are answering it." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I wondered if the connection had failed. "You understand," the voice said finally, "that the call was not addressed to your people specifically. It was addressed to anyone with the strength to help. We did not think that meant you." I felt my jaw tighten at that, but Captain Finch did not so much as blink. "Strength is not always about size," she said. "We are here. That is what matters." Another pause, shorter this time. "There are those among us who will be grateful," the voice said. "There are others who will resent that it was you and not one of the great houses. I tell you this honestly, so that you are not surprised by what you find when you arrive." "Thank you for your honesty," Finch said. "We will not be surprised by much. We rarely are given the chance to be anything else." The channel closed, and for a while, nobody on the bridge said anything. I found out over the following 2 days exactly what that voice had meant. The refugees from the coalition, what remained of it, had scattered along 100 different escape routes, and some of their ships limped close enough to our formation that we took them in. I helped process their arrivals, logging names, injuries, what little cargo they had managed to save. They were called the Velen Accord, an old alliance of 3 allied species who had built trade routes and treaties across a wide stretch of space for over 600 years. I had read about them once, briefly, in a history course on interstellar relations. They were not a military power. They were traders, scholars, farmers of strange and beautiful crops that grew only in low gravity. They had never needed a great fleet because nobody had ever attacked them. Until now. The first survivor I spoke with directly was a thin, silver-skinned woman named Orena, one of the Velen themselves, who had lost her ship, her family, and most of her crew in the span of 11 hours. She sat wrapped in a thermal blanket in our medical bay, staring at nothing, and when I asked gently if she could tell me anything about what had attacked them, she looked at me the way you might look at a friend who has asked you to relive a nightmare out loud. They came from nowhere, she said. No warning beacon, no demand, no message. One moment the sky was empty, the next it was full of ships that ate light instead of reflecting it. We could not even see them clearly until they were already firing. Do you know what they call themselves? I asked. She shook her head slowly. They do not speak, not to us, not to anyone, as far as we know. We have a name for them now, because someone has to. We call them the Hollow. I wrote that down, my hand steadier than I felt inside. How many ships? I asked. We do not know. Enough to break 3 fleets in a single week. Enough that the great houses, the old empires who could have helped us, chose instead to fortify their own borders and let us fall. Her voice cracked slightly. You are the only ones who came. I did not have a good answer for that, so I simply reached out and held her hand for a moment, the way I would have for anyone in pain, human or not. She let me. Later that day, Captain Finch called a briefing for the senior officers, and I was asked to attend to report what I had learned from the survivors. The briefing room was crowded, every seat filled, faces tense in the low light. Here is what we know, Finch said, standing at the head of the table. The Hollow do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They do not appear to take prisoners, and they do not appear to want territory in any way we understand territory. They arrive, they destroy, and they move on. 3 fleets larger than ours have already fallen to them in the last 2 months. A murmur went through the room. So why are we doing this? One of the younger officers asked, not disrespectfully, just honestly. If fleets bigger than ours already lost. Finch looked at him for a long moment. Because bigger is not the same as better prepared, she said. The Velen Accord was a trading alliance. They had no doctrine for total war. We do. Every ship in this fleet was built and crewed by people who grew up on a planet that spent most of its history at war with itself, before we ever looked to the stars. That is not something to be proud of, but it means we are not walking into this the way they did. She let that sit for a moment. I am not promising anyone that we win easily, she continued. I am not promising anyone comes home untouched. What I am promising is that we do not run. We did not come this far to run. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. 2 days later, our scout ships found the edge of the battlefield, and what we found made the briefing room's tension feel like a memory of an easier time. It began with debris, not wreckage in the way I understood it, twisted metal and drifting hull plates, but something stranger. Entire ship sections floating dark and cold, untouched by fire or impact, as if the life had simply been switched off inside them rather than destroyed from outside. Our sensors could not explain it. Whatever weapon the Hollow used, it did not look like anything in our records. I stood at the viewport with 2 other officers, staring out at a graveyard of ships stretching farther than our sensors could measure, and none of us said a word for a long time. That was a battle fleet, one of the officers finally said, her voice hollow. Look at the size of some of those hulls. That is not a trading convoy. That is a warship 3 times our size. And it is dead, the other said. Completely dead. I thought of Arena's voice, describing ships that ate light instead of reflecting it, and I felt something cold settle into my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. We spent the next full day recovering what survivors we could find drifting in the wreckage field, running silent, engines cold, in case the hollow were still nearby. Captain Finch ordered strict discipline, no unnecessary transmissions, no bright running lights, nothing that might draw attention before we were ready. It was during this search that we found the first Velen warship still partially intact, its crew barely alive, its captain conscious enough to speak. I was brought in to translate, since the Velen dialect was closest to the one I had studied. The captain, an older man named DayHFY, gripped my hand with more strength than I expected from someone so injured. "You are human," he said, as if confirming something he could not quite believe. "The signal reached you." "It reached a lot of people," I said carefully. "We were the ones who came." His eyes, dark and deep-set, studied my face for a long moment. "They said your kind was too young to matter," he said. "Too small, too new. I am glad to learn they were wrong." "We are still learning what we are capable of," I admitted. "We do not have your history, or your knowledge of this part of space. We only have the will to try." DayHFY managed something close to a smile, though pain pulled at the edges of it. "In my experience," he said, "will is worth more than history, when history has already lost." He told us what he could before the medical team insisted he rest. The Hollow fleet had appeared roughly 3 weeks earlier, without warning, without demand, and had methodically worked through Velen space system by system. There was no pattern to their targets that made sense, no resource they seemed to want, no message they left behind except destruction. The only mercy, if it could be called that, was that they did not appear to hunt down survivors who fled. They simply moved on to the next system, as if the people fleeing behind them did not matter enough to finish. "Where are they now?" Captain Finch asked, once I had relayed the translation. DayHFY's expression darkened. "3 systems ahead," he said. "A world called Doran's Reach. It is the last inhabited system before open space. If it falls, there will be nowhere left to run, and nothing left to warn the rest of the galaxy in time." Finch turned to her tactical officer immediately. "How long to reach Doran's Reach at full burn?" 18 hours, Captain." "Then we have 18 hours to prepare a fleet that has never fought something like this, for a battle we cannot afford to lose." She looked around the room at all of us, and I saw something in her eyes that was not quite fear and not quite confidence, but a kind of grim determination that felt, in that moment, like the only thing holding the ship together. "Rest if you can," she said. "Eat if you can. Say what you need to say to the people beside you, because I will not pretend to you that tomorrow is guaranteed." I returned to my quarters that night and sat for a long time with the small data pad that held messages from home, from my parents, from a few close friends who had sent well wishes when the Armada departed. I did not answer any of them. I did not know what to say that would not sound like a goodbye. Instead, I thought about that thin, desperate voice that had first reached us on Halden Reach, and the way Captain Finch had answered it without hesitation. I thought about Orena's hand in mine, and DayHFY's words about will outlasting history. We had come a long way to answer a call for help. Tomorrow, we would find out if answering was enough. Outside my window, the black wreckage field slid slowly past, silent and endless, a warning written in dead ships for anyone brave enough, or foolish enough, to read it. We were about to write the next line ourselves. The 18 hours passed faster than any of us wanted. I did not sleep. I do not think anyone on the Valiant slept that night. Not really. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the engines, and tried to picture what waited for us at Doran's Reach. My imagination kept failing. Nothing I could invent felt as frightening as the silent, dead ships we had already seen. At 0500, the ship-wide comm crackled, and Captain Finch's voice filled every corridor. "All hands to stations. We arrive at Doran's Reach in 1 hour. This is not a drill." I was at my communications post within minutes, my hands moving over the console out of habit more than thought. Around me, the bridge crew worked in tight, practiced silence. The kind of quiet that comes from people who have trained together long enough that words are no longer necessary. Captain Finch stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the main view screen, which still showed nothing but the long white stretch of our approach. "Status of the fleet," she said. "All 312 ships holding formation," the tactical officer reported. "Fighter wings ready in the hangars, weapons at standby. Velen survivors we picked up? Secured in the lower decks, Captain. DayHFY insisted on being present in an advisory capacity. He is patched into the tactical channel now." "Good. We may need his knowledge of Doran's Reach's terrain." The ship shuddered as we dropped out of the jump corridor, and the view screen filled with stars, and then, a moment later, with the sight of a planet still whole, still alive, its cities glowing faintly on the night side like scattered embers. For one breath, it looked peaceful. Then the sensors began to scream. "Contact," the tactical officer said, her voice sharp. "Multiple contacts. Hollow fleet, confirmed in orbit around Doran's Reach. Estimated strength, 400 vessels, possibly more. Sensors are having trouble distinguishing individual hulls." "Understood," Finch said, her voice calm in a way that steadied the whole bridge. "All ships, hold formation. Fighter wings to ready position. I want firing solutions the moment we are in range, but nobody fires until my order." I watched the tactical display fill with red markers, more of them than I could easily count, spread in a loose cloud around the planet, like a swarm of insects circling a dying light. Beside them, smaller markers blinked, the last defense ships of Doran's Reach, already outnumbered 10-1, still holding their line because they had nowhere left to retreat to. "They are still fighting," I said, half to myself. "They have been fighting for 6 hours straight." DayHFY's voice came through the channel, tight with pain and grief. "They knew reinforcements might not come in time. They fought anyway." Captain Finch's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure their fight was not for nothing," she said. "All ships. This is Finch. We are not here to observe. We are here to fight. Fleet, advance to engagement range. On my mark." The Valiant surged forward, and around us, the entire human armada moved as one, 312 ships breaking from formation into an attack pattern that had been drilled into every captain during the long jump out here. I had studied the plan during the briefings, a strategy built not around one grand tactic, but around dozens of smaller, faster strikes, hitting many points at once, rather than committing everything to a single line, the same way human commanders had learned, generations ago, that a smaller, faster force could break a larger, slower one if it never let the larger force settle into a rhythm. "Range in 30 seconds, the tactical officer called out. I gripped the edge of my console, watching the red markers grow larger on the screen, resolving slowly into shapes, strange, angular ships, with hulls that seemed to swallow the light around them, rather than reflect it, just as Orena had described. Even through the display, they looked wrong, unnatural, built by something that did not think the way we thought. "Range achieved," the tactical officer said. "Fire," Captain Finch said. The Valiant shuddered as every weapon battery loosed at once, and around us, the whole fleet did the same, hundreds of ships opening fire in a single coordinated volley that lit up the dark space around Doran's Reach like a sudden sunrise. I watched the first wave of hollow ships take the impact, and for one terrible moment I feared it would do nothing at all. Then the first ship broke apart. A cheer went up somewhere on the bridge, quickly hushed by the tactical officer's next report. Multiple confirmed hits, at least a dozen enemy vessels destroyed in the opening volley. They did not expect coordinated fire at this range. "They are not built for this kind of fight," DayHFY's voice broke in, something like hope entering it for the first time. "The Velen fleet, the great houses who fought before you, they fought in traditional formations, honor lines, single engagements, ship to ship. Your people are fighting like a storm. Many strikes, many directions, no pattern for them to predict." "That is exactly the idea," Finch said. "Helm, evasive pattern beta. Do not let them get a clean shot at us. Gunners, keep firing. Do not wait for a perfect target. Take what you can get." The battle became something I could not describe in the neat, clean language of the briefing room. It was chaos, controlled as much as anyone could control it, ships weaving between each other, weapons fire crossing the dark in every direction, alarms blaring somewhere on every deck as shields took hits, as hull breaches were reported and sealed, as crews fought fires that had no business existing in the vacuum of space, but somehow did anyway. I lost track of time. I only know that at some point the ship rocked hard enough that I was thrown from my chair, and when I pulled myself back up, smoke was curling from a burst panel 2 stations down from mine, and a young engineer named Nathan Price was already there with a suppression unit, putting it out before it could spread. "Report," Finch called, not taking her eyes from the screen. "Shields at 60%, someone answered. "Minor hull breach on deck 4, sealed and contained. We are still in the fight, Captain." "Then let's stay in it." I do not know how long the first phase of the battle lasted. It felt like hours. It was, according to the ship's log I read much later, closer to 40 minutes. In that time, our fleet destroyed nearly 60 hollow ships, at a cost of 11 of our own. 11 ships, each carrying crews I had trained alongside, eaten meals with, shared long quiet nights with during the jump out here. I remember the moment we lost the Cormorant, a cruiser 2 positions to our left in the formation. I was monitoring the general fleet channel when its captain's voice came through, calm even as alarms screamed behind her. "This is Cormorant. Hull integrity failing. We are venting atmosphere on 3 decks. Requesting." The channel cut to static. Nobody on our bridge said anything. There was no time to grieve, not yet, not with the battle still raging around us. But I saw Captain Finch's hand tighten briefly on the edge of her console, the only sign she allowed herself before turning back to the fight. "Tactical status of the hollow formation. They are adapting, Captain. Their ships are beginning to concentrate fire on our larger vessels instead of spreading their attacks. I believe they have identified our carriers as priority targets. Then we protect the carriers. Fighter wings screen formation around the Providence and the Halcyon. Everyone else, keep pressure on their flanks. Do not let them regroup." The fighter wings launched in waves, small, fast ships weaving between the larger hulls, drawing fire, breaking enemy formations before they could concentrate. I watched on the display as our fighters, flown by pilots barely older than I was, cut through gaps in the hollow lines that our larger ships could never have reached. One of those pilots, a young woman named Grace Ellery, flying under the call sign Kestrel 2, became something of a legend on our ship that day, though she would never have called herself that. Her voice came through the tactical channel clear and steady, even as she weaved her fighter through a storm of enemy fire to draw 3 hollow ships away from the Providence, buying the carrier the seconds it needed to complete an emergency maneuver out of the worst of the fighting. "Kestrel 2, you are surrounded," the tactical officer warned her. "Break off, we will send support." "Negative," she answered, her voice tight but sure. "If I break off now, they follow me straight to the Providence. I can hold them a little longer." "Grace, that is an order." "With respect, Captain, I am not letting 3,000 crew members suffer because I got scared." Kestrel 2 out. I watched her fighter on the display, a tiny point of light darting between much larger red markers, and I do not think I breathed again until she finally broke free, damaged but alive, her shields nearly gone, her fighter trailing debris, but alive. "Kestrel 2 returning to hangar," she said, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "Providence is clear." A ragged cheer went up across the fleet channel, quickly quieted by the ongoing demands of the battle, but I saw more than one officer on our bridge close their eyes for just a moment, grateful. The battle turned, slowly, in our favor as the hours wore on. The hollow ships, we began to realize, fought with a strange mechanical uniformity, as if every vessel followed the exact same tactical logic without deviation. Once our analysts identified the pattern, Captain Finch and the other captains began to exploit it, feeding false signals, drawing groups of hollow ships into positions where our concentrated fire could do the most damage. "They do not improvise," Ilvash observed at one point, watching the tactical display with something between awe and exhaustion. Your people improvise constantly. I begin to understand why the great houses feared what you might become, even as they mocked what you were. I did not have time to think about what that meant, not then. I was too busy relaying commands, tracking casualty reports, listening to the voices of 100 different ships fighting for their place in the dark space around Doran's Reach. By the 6th hour of the battle, the Hollow Fleet's numbers had thinned considerably, though ours had thinned too. We had lost 23 ships by then, more than I wanted to count, each one a name I would learn to say quietly, respectfully, in the days that followed. But the enemy had lost far more, over 200 vessels destroyed or disabled, and the remaining Hollow ships began, for the first time since the battle began, to fall back. "They are retreating," the tactical officer reported, disbelief plain in her voice. "Captain, the Hollow Fleet is disengaging." Captain Finch did not celebrate. She simply nodded, her face tired but steady. "Do not pursue," she said. "Let them go. We came here to save Doran's Reach, not to chase a fight we do not need to finish today. Focus all efforts on search and rescue, on defending the planet's orbit, on getting our wounded ships stabilized." As the last of the Hollow ships folded into whatever strange technology let them slip away into the dark, a silence fell over the bridge, heavy and strange after so many hours of noise and fear. I looked at the tactical display, now clear of red markers, and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time since we had entered the system. "Casualty report," Finch said quietly. The tactical officer read the numbers, and I will not repeat them here, because numbers on a screen cannot capture what those losses meant to the people who lived through them. I will only say that when she finished, nobody spoke for a long moment, and Captain Finch closed her eyes briefly before opening them again, her voice steady when she finally addressed the fleet. "To every ship, every crew, everyone who fought today," she said, her voice carrying across the fleet-wide channel. "We did not come here for glory. We did not come here to prove anything to anyone. We came because someone called for help, and we were not willing to let that call go unanswered. Today, Doran's Reach still stands, because you refused to let it fall. I am proud of every one of you. Rest now, if you can. We have earned it." I sat back in my chair, exhausted in a way that went deeper than my body, and looked out at the planet still turning peacefully below us, its cities still glowing, its people still alive because a fleet from a small, young, often mocked species had chosen to answer a call meant for someone braver, or older, or stronger. We had not been any of those things, not by the galaxy's old measurements. We had simply been willing, and on that day, at Doran's Reach, willing had been enough. News travels strangely in the space between stars. It moves slower than light in some ways, carried ship to ship, relay to relay, and yet it seemed to reach every corner of known space within days of the battle at Doran's Reach. By the time the Valiant finished its repairs in orbit, Captain Finch was fielding requests for contact from empires that had never once acknowledged Earth's existence in any formal way before. I was still working communications, though my duties had shifted from routine fleet traffic to something far stranger, filtering incoming messages from dozens of unfamiliar frequencies, sorting real diplomatic contact from the flood of curiosity, suspicion, and in some cases, thinly disguised fear. "Another one," I said, reading the header on an incoming transmission. "This one is from the Thren Compact. They want to speak with Fleet Command directly." Captain Finch, sitting across the bridge reviewing repair reports, did not look up right away. "Put it in the queue," she said. "How many does that make today?" 14, I said, not counting the 2 that came in overnight. She exhaled slowly, rubbing her eyes. 2 weeks ago, we could not get a single one of these empires to answer a distress call. Now they cannot stop calling us. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a tired kind of clarity, the same clarity I had heard from Ilvash back on his broken ship. Strength changes how people look at you, whether or not you wanted to be looked at that way in the first place. The Velen Accord, what remained of it, was the first to formally thank us, and their gratitude felt different from everything that followed, warmer, less calculated. Orena, still recovering from her injuries, asked to speak with me personally once she learned I had helped process the survivor logs during those difficult early days. I wanted to see the face that listened to me, she said, when I visited her in the medical bay. Her silver skin had regained some of its color, and her eyes, though still tired, held something steadier than the grief I had first seen in them. "I am glad you are recovering," I told her. "Because of you, because of all of you." She studied me for a moment. "Do you understand what you have done? Not just here, at Doran's Reach, everywhere. Every empire that watched this battle from a safe distance is now recalculating everything they believed about your kind." "Some of that recalculation does not sound entirely comfortable," I admitted. She smiled faintly. "No, it will not be. Power that appears where none was expected always makes the powerful uneasy. But I would rather live in an uncomfortable galaxy than a dead one. I think you understand that better than most species do." I carried her words with me into the following weeks, as the diplomatic requests kept arriving and the shape of our new place among the stars slowly came into focus. Some of it was honestly wonderful, a coalition of smaller, previously unaligned species, worlds that had spent generations avoiding the notice of the great empires simply to survive, reached out with careful, hopeful offers of friendship. They had watched Doran's Reach from a distance, through relayed sensor data and second-hand reports, and they had seen something they had never seen before, a fleet that came without being asked, expecting nothing in return but the chance to help. I remember the first formal meeting with representatives of one such coalition, a group of delegates from a modest cluster of worlds called the DayHFY Concord. Their lead delegate, a calm, thoughtful man named Peter Halverson, who had grown up on a human colony bordering their space and served as the natural bridge between our peoples, met with Captain Finch and several other officers in the Valiant's forward conference room. "We do not have much to offer in terms of military strength," Halverson said, his hands folded on the table. "Our worlds are agricultural, mostly, some light industry, but we have resources and knowledge of trade routes through this region that took us centuries to map. We would like to offer what we have, in exchange for the kind of alliance that does not require us to kneel before it is granted." Captain Finch considered this for a long moment. "We are not interested in anyone kneeling," she said. "We came out here because someone was drowning and no one else would throw a line. That does not change because the water is calmer now." Halverson's expression softened into something like relief. "Then perhaps," he said, "this is the beginning of something neither of our peoples expected to find out here." Not every conversation went so warmly. 3 days after the DayHFY Concord's visit, we received a formal delegation from one of the old, established empires, a proud and ancient people called the Corvain Dominion, who had ignored the original distress call entirely and had, according to Ilvash, actively discouraged their allies from responding as well. Their delegate, a tall, imposing figure named Consul Aldrin Vask, arrived aboard a sleek diplomatic cruiser and requested an audience with Captain Finch in terms that made it clear he expected deference, not conversation. "You have caused quite a disruption," Vask said, once the pleasantries, brief and cold, had concluded. "The balance of this region has held for 3 centuries. Your intervention, however well-intentioned, has unsettled agreements that took generations to negotiate." "With respect, Consul," Finch replied evenly, "the balance you are describing allowed an entire alliance to be nearly destroyed, while everyone who could have helped decided it was not their concern. I am not sure that is a balance worth preserving exactly as it was." Vask's expression tightened, though his voice remained carefully controlled. "You are young," he said. "Your species has existed among the stars for what, 30 years? You do not yet understand the weight of galactic politics, the reasons empires choose caution over impulse." "Maybe not," Finch said, "but I understand the weight of a distress call nobody answered until we did. I understand the weight of watching a planet's cities light up below us, still standing, still alive, because we chose not to be cautious." I am willing to learn the rest, Consul. I am not willing to apologize for what we did at Doran's Reach. The meeting ended without resolution, though not, I think, without effect. Word of that exchange spread almost as quickly as word of the battle itself, and I began to notice a subtle shift in how other delegations approached us afterward. Less condescension, more careful calculation, the kind of respect that comes not from admiration but from the recognition that we would not simply fold under pressure. It was strange living inside that shift. I had grown up hearing, in school and in casual conversation, about humanity's place at the edge of galactic society, tolerated but rarely respected, useful sometimes but never truly included. Now I watched that story rewrite itself in real time, and I was not always sure how to feel about it. I said as much to DayHFY one evening as he prepared to depart for a temporary settlement being built for Velen survivors on a nearby world. He had recovered enough to walk on his own, though he still moved carefully, favoring the side of his body that had been injured in the attack. "You seem troubled," he observed, as I helped him carry a small case of belongings to the shuttle bay. "For someone whose people are being celebrated across half the galaxy." "I do not know if celebrated is the right word," I said. "Feared, maybe. Watched closely. I am not sure that is the same as respected." DayHFY considered this as we walked. "In my experience," he said, "fear and respect often arrive together, and it takes time to know which one will settle in for the long stay. What matters is what you do with the attention once it arrives. Some species, when they are finally seen, become cruel with their new power. Others become generous. I do not think your captain is the cruel sort. I do not think you are either." "I hope you are right," I said. "So do I," he said, with a tired smile, "for all our sakes." Before he boarded the shuttle, he turned back to me one last time. "Whatever happens next," he said, "know that the Velen Accord will remember who came when we called, and who did not. That memory will outlast whatever politics unfold in the coming years. That is worth more than you may realize." I watched his shuttle depart, carrying him toward the beginning of a long, difficult rebuilding, and I felt the weight of his words settle somewhere deep in my chest. Over the following weeks, the Armada remained stationed near Doran's Reach, assisting with repairs, coordinating relief efforts for displaced Velen refugees, and continuing the endless stream of diplomatic exchanges that came with our sudden, unwanted prominence. Captain Finch handled each conversation with the same steady patience she had shown Consul Vask, neither seeking conflict nor backing away from it, and I began to understand that this, more than the battle itself, was its own kind of test. It was during this period that we received new intelligence that would prove far more important than any diplomatic exchange. A scout ship patrolling the outer edge of Doran's Reach's system picked up faint, encoded transmissions, fragments of a signal our analysts eventually traced back toward its likely origin, deep in a region of space no inhabited empire had ever fully mapped. Captain Finch called a full briefing the moment the analysis was complete, and the mood in the room was different from any briefing before it, quieter, more focused, as if everyone present understood that whatever came next would matter more than anything we had already survived. "We have a partial location for the source of the Hollow Fleet," the intelligence officer reported, projecting a star chart onto the table. "A cluster designated only by coordinates in the old surveys, far beyond any settled territory. The signal patterns suggest something large, something that has been building or gathering resources for a long time." "How long?" Finch asked. "Best estimate, decades, possibly longer." A heavy silence followed. "Then Doran's Reach was not an isolated attack," Finch said slowly. "It was one strike in something much larger." "That is our assessment, Captain." Finch was quiet for a long moment, studying the star chart, the vast unmapped cluster glowing faintly at its center, like a wound waiting to be examined. "Then we are not finished," she said finally. "Doran's Reach was the beginning of an answer, not the end of one. Contact Earth Command. Contact every ally we have made in these past weeks. If what is gathering out there is even half as large as this intelligence suggests, we cannot face it alone, and I do not intend to let anyone else face it alone either." I sat at my station, listening to the weight of that decision settle over the room, and thought back to the very first signal I had ever decoded, that thin, desperate voice pleading for anyone who would listen. We had answered it once. It seemed the galaxy was not finished asking. It took 6 weeks to build the coalition that would follow the signal into the unmapped cluster, and in those 6 weeks, I watched something happen that no one, not Captain Finch, not the Velen survivors, not even the proudest ambassadors from the oldest empires, could have predicted so quickly. The galaxy began to organize itself around us. It did not happen all at once, and it was never as simple as the news feeds later made it sound. There were arguments, long ones, between empires who had spent centuries distrusting each other, now being asked to stand shoulder to shoulder against a threat none of them fully understood. There were empires who refused entirely, the Corvain Dominion among them, choosing instead to reinforce their own borders and wait to see how the rest of us fared. But there were also empires, smaller ones mostly, who had watched Doran's reach and understood, perhaps for the first time, that isolation had never truly protected them, only delayed the day their turn would come. By the time our combined fleet gathered at the edge of the unmapped cluster, we numbered just over 900 ships, drawn from 11 different species, following battle plans built on the same principles that had carried us through Doran's reach: coordination over tradition, adaptability over pride, and a willingness to take losses that other fleets, built on rigid honor and careful preservation, had never quite learned to accept. Captain Finch had been given overall command of the combined fleet, a decision that surprised no one who had watched the past 6 weeks unfold, though it clearly unsettled a few of the older delegates who still remembered, with some discomfort, meeting us for the first time as strangers rather than allies. "You look like you have not slept in a week," I told her, the night before we crossed into the cluster. "I have not," she admitted, managing a tired smile. "There is a great deal of responsibility in being trusted by people who did not trust you a month ago." "Do you regret any of it?" I asked. "Doran's reach, all of this. Sometimes I wonder if we understood what we were starting when we answered that first call." She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. I think about the cost sometimes. The ships we lost, the people who did not come home. That weighs on me every day, and it should, but I do not regret choosing to answer. The alternative was letting an entire alliance die while we told ourselves it was not our problem. I could not have lived with that kind of quiet." We crossed into the unmapped cluster at 0400 the following morning, and within hours, our scout ships confirmed what the intelligence reports had only hinted at. It was not a fleet we found gathered in that dark, forgotten stretch of space. It was a construction, vast beyond anything I had imagined, a structure built from countless ships, fused and grown together over decades, orbiting a dead star at the cluster's heart, pulsing with a strange, cold light that our sensors struggled to properly measure. "That is not a shipyard," Ilvash's voice came through the channel. He had insisted on joining the fleet as an advisor despite his injuries, unwilling to sit safely aside while others faced what had broken his people. "That is something closer to a hive. I do not think the Hollow are a fleet in the way we understand fleets. I think they may be something closer to a single, spreading mind, and that structure is where it grows." The bridge fell quiet at that, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. "Can we communicate with it?" Finch asked. "Negotiate, even now?" "We have tried. Every time we have encountered them," Ilvash said. "There has never been a response. I do not believe it recognizes us as anything worth speaking to. I believe it sees us the way a storm sees a shoreline, something to move through and reshape, not something to reason with." Finch absorbed this, her expression grim but steady. "Then we do what we did at Doran's reach," she said. "We do not try to reason with a storm. We give it a reason to stop." The battle that followed was the largest I would ever witness, and I hope, for the rest of my life, that it remains the largest I ever have to witness. 900 ships from 11 different species moved as one coordinated force against a structure that seemed to birth new hollow vessels from its own mass, even as we fought, dark, angular ships peeling away from the great construction like sparks thrown from a fire. I will not pretend the battle was clean, or simple, or easy to describe. I spent the worst hours of it relaying desperate status reports between Allied ships whose languages our translators struggled to keep pace with, coordinating rescue efforts for stranded crews, watching the tactical display fill and empty and fill again with markers representing ships and the people inside them, fighting for a chance the galaxy had almost decided not to give them. At the center of it all, Captain Finch held the coalition together with a steadiness that I do not think I fully appreciated until much later, when I had time to reflect on everything that had happened. She coordinated fleets who had never fought alongside each other before, translated tactical philosophies that clashed as often as they complemented, and somehow wove 900 ships from 11 worlds into something that could move and strike and adapt as a single body. The core structure is weakening, the tactical officer reported, roughly 5 hours into the engagement. Concentrated fire from the Ithera and Velen contingents has breached its outer defenses. If we press the assault now, we may be able to reach the central mass before it can regenerate its losses. Do it, Finch said. All fleets, converge on the breach. This is the moment. We do not get another one. I watched the combined fleet surge forward, ships of every shape and design I had never imagined moving together toward that pulsing dark heart, and for a strange, suspended moment, I forgot to be afraid, caught instead in something like awe at what we had built together in so short a time. The final assault lasted less than an hour, though it felt, in the moment, like it stretched far longer. I remember the structure's light flickering, dimming, the strange dark ships that had seemed endless, finally beginning to falter as whatever intelligence guided them lost coherence under the combined pressure of 11 different species fighting, for the first time, not for their own individual survival, but for each other. When the structure finally went dark, collapsing slowly in on itself, in a silence that felt almost sacred after so many hours of noise, the bridge of the Valiant fell utterly still. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke. We simply watched, exhausted and disbelieving, as the thing that had broken empires far older than ours folded into the dark and did not rise again. "Confirm status," Finch said finally, her voice hoarse. "No further hollow signatures detected, Captain," the tactical officer reported, her voice trembling with relief. "The structure is fully collapsed. It is over." A quiet sound moved through the bridge then, not quite a cheer, something softer, more disbelieving, the sound of people who had spent months bracing for a fight, finally allowing themselves to imagine what came after it. I thought, in that moment, of Orena's frightened voice in the medical bay, of Ilvash's steady dignity even in the wreckage of his ship, of Grace Ellery weaving her fighter through impossible odds to save a carrier full of strangers, of Halvorson's careful hope for an alliance built on respect rather than fear. I thought of every name I had learned to say quietly in the weeks since Doran's reach, every loss that had made this victory possible. It had cost us, it had cost all of us, but it was over. The weeks that followed were quieter, filled with the slow, careful work of rebuilding rather than the sharp urgency of battle. The coalition that had formed to face the Hollow did not dissolve once the threat was gone, as some had expected it might. Instead, delegates from all 11 species began meeting regularly, first out of necessity, coordinating relief efforts and rebuilding shattered worlds, and then, gradually, out of something that looked increasingly like genuine partnership. I was present at the formal signing of what would come to be known as the Doran Accord, a loose but meaningful alliance between the species who had stood together against the Hollow, humanity chief among them, not because we demanded that position, but because the others had, in their own ways, insisted on it. Captain Finch, newly promoted to Fleet Admiral in recognition of her role in the campaign, stood at the center of that ceremony, looking somehow both older and lighter than she had at the start of our journey. When it came time for her to speak, she kept her words simple. "We did not set out to become anyone's leader," she said, addressing the gathered delegates. "We set out because someone was in trouble, and we could not stand by and do nothing. If this alliance means anything going forward, I hope it means that none of us ever again mistake caution for wisdom when someone is drowning and needs a hand. That is the only lesson worth carrying out of everything we have survived together. I stood near the back of that ceremony, no longer quite the same person who had first decoded a desperate, garbled signal on a quiet outpost so many months before. I thought about how strange it was that a call for help, meant for someone else, had ended up reshaping not just humanity's place among the stars, but the shape of the galaxy itself. Later that evening, I found a quiet corner of the observation deck and looked out at the stars, calmer now than they had been in months, and allowed myself, finally, to feel the full weight of everything we had been through. The friends we had lost, the strangers who had become something closer to family, the frightened, uncertain young man I had been, standing at a communications console, wondering if answering a call meant for someone else was truly our place. I understood now, in a way I could not have understood then, that it had never really been a question of place at all. It had only ever been a question of whether we were willing to answer. We had been. And because we had been, an alliance grieving its dead had found a second chance. A construction that had broken empires for decades had finally fallen silent, and a species once dismissed as small, young, and unimportant had found its true place among the stars, not as rulers and not as conquerors, but as the ones who came when the galaxy cried out for help and refused to let that cry go unanswered. Somewhere out among the stars, I knew, there would be other calls, other crises, other moments when caution would tempt someone to look away. I did not know what those moments would ask of us, or what they would cost. But I knew, standing there on that quiet observation deck with the galaxy stretching endlessly beyond the glass, that whatever came next, humanity would answer. We always would.